Well, good morning, everyone. After the Mungers struggled to get on, we are ready to go here. I'm really pleased that Lee Pedersen is with us today. Some of you might remember in September of 2019, we had some folks come up from the Twin Cities who talked about uh, co-housing and what they were trying to do there. And Lee spoke for a short while on that at that forum. Now she's back with a full forum to talk about co-housing. She and trying to create that here in Duluth. She's lived in Duluth for about 5 years. Before that, she was a librarian at Brown University and has been a chemistry professor and very much involved in the field of chemistry before that. So she is very excited to create co-housing here. She's done a lot of work on that issue and she has a lot of information for us. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Lee.
Thank you, Sally.
Mhm.
I want to thank the organizers for inviting me to the forum, and I want to definitely thank Brett because he's helping me with the technology. So I want to keep my sage on the stage as short as possible and give you enough time to ask questions. I do kind of ask that you don't unmute while I'm presenting because I'll be in the midst of a PowerPoint and that could be kind of complicated. So with that alone, I'm going to, share my screen. Now, let's hope. Hallelujah.
The Christmas
All
miracle.
right. So the the topic is co-housing for you. All right, there's my information, and Brett put it into the chat as far as contact information is concerned. I'm hoping that many of you or all of you have looked at the recent Connect that Cherry put out. It's got 2 links to TED Talk kind of things. They are very motivational about why people want to live in co-housing. If you haven't been able to get at them, please do so after. They're highly recommended. Okay, so the Katie McCammon is the mother of co-housing in the United States, and she and her significant other, Chuck Durrett, went in the 1980s to Denmark and studied co-housing there, and as architects brought it back. But they also became evangelists for co-housing and started the movement in the United States. So I'm going to do one little thing here. I got to get my face off my screen here so I can see my slides. All right, so co-housing, living a good life, using less resources. And I've talked to co-housers at conferences, I've talked to them in person at their sites, and they, in the majority, do have a great time. Why do we need community? Because our mainstream lifestyles, like living in developments where you hardly know your neighbors, where you're constantly on media, where you have to drive everywhere, even to see friends, are very isolating. And community, co-housing is community, and it creates connection. And this connection, I don't think, is surprising to any of you. There is joy in the connection. There's health in the connection, compassion for others, growth of yourself, and yes, sustainability. Now, here is a really compact history of co-housing in Denmark. They started building the communities in 1970, multi-generational, and then in 1985, a group of seniors said, well, we want to live in a co-housing village, but because we don't want to live in the senior housing that we're expected to move into. Now, they've been doing it for over 5 decades, and they have so much information that people in the United States can learn from. And a couple of the things I bulleted here is that they've learned that they can't have more than 50 adults making decisions. And you'll see later on why that's very important. They've also found that they need fewer than 50 adults when you're in a senior co-housing community. It is essential to have what is called the common meal for all members of the community to eat together on a regular basis. Their experiences extend to the kinds of models of whether it's private or co-op or rental, of how they've managed the financial aspect of co-housing. And again, seniors, this is a quote about the seniors, that they wanted senior co-housing only because they didn't want to be warehoused. All right, so designing co-housing. There can be, as you can see on the left, clustered designs. The designs are not detached houses in most cases, but attached. Or you can have what are apartment, condo looking, multi-story co-housing communities. One characteristic is people park away from their homes. The purpose of that is because they want to build relationships, and coming together in a parking lot and then walking back together to their homes builds these kind of pleasant experiences. Co-housing also tends to have, whether it's in a multi-story setup or in a clustered setup, they have pedestrian streets where people walk by people's homes and can see, say hi. It's just constantly designing to build relationships. And there's a lot of shared property, whether it's a garden or whether it's a playground. Now, part of the design of co-housing is the common house. And this quote about our common house is an extension of my living room is extremely important, because it talks about how the common house, the features allow you to have smaller homes. What's in a common house? Well, remember that common meal. So there is a dining room and a meeting area. There has to be a kitchen to create the common meal and events. There's often a living room where people gather together to watch videos together, or TV, or sports events, or play games to build the camaraderie. Because the units are smaller, guest rooms tend to be added to the common house so that family members can visit residents and be in a comfortable setting. There are workshops and craft rooms for multi-generational. Kind of a kid's room is usually essential for indoor play. There are multi-purpose rooms, whether it's a gym, a room for teens, a bicycle space. And finally, specifically for senior co-housing, there tends to be a set aside for a caregiver who possibly is paid by the community or is caring for one or more members of the community. And how do co-housers connect? Well, there's those common meals again. They govern together. This circle that is being shown is that all the adult members get together and make decisions. There's self-management. So they try to keep costs down by not hiring outside services. So they handle the landscaping, they clear the snow, they clean up the property. And finally, there's this culture of sharing, whether it's sharing a lawnmower. so that you don't have to have your own personal lawnmower or tools, taking people to doctor's appointments, or even sharing a car. Now, you have to understand that the individual units are fully functional. They have kitchens, they are fully independent, but because of that common house and the shared spaces, you don't need as much square footage. So typically you have about 800 to 1600 square foot in your unit. Now, these are the common characteristics of co-housing, and I'm not going to go over these bullet points because we're going to check into those individually. Participatory process. This is what is needed from the very beginning of a new community. The community has to decide on how they're going to make decisions. They create vision and goals, and these things together facilitate the design of the community. Relationships and bonds are created from the very beginning and continue on and are part of the daily interactions even once people live in the co-housing community. The designs of the neighborhood are critical for building this community, and there are what are called gathering nodes, whether it's benches and tables and chairs. I visited a co-housing community that's multi-story, and they have little niches where they have tables and chairs where neighbors come and just sit down and talk. Things are close, they're not spread out. And of course, those walkways or pathways. Common areas, let me reiterate, common areas are supplements so that private units can be smaller. And the common areas, shared spaces, are patios and decks and sheds and other things. And again, all of this togetherness creates relationships. They're used daily. And here's an important part of sustainability: energy use and costs go down, and you don't have to have your own tools. You don't even have to have a washer and dryer in your unit with a laundry. Resident management. This means that the residents, all of the residents, make decisions together. The majority, I would say more than very few co-housing communities that have been successful use majority vote. They use a version of consensus or consent. They sit in that dining room area and have meetings together, but there are also committees and teams that specialize. And here's an interesting point. Some bylaws of some communities express the expectation of a certain number of hours of service to the community on work days. Important here also is to understand there are no top-down leaders in the majority of successful co-housing. This is all about collaborating, cooperating, and sharing, and everyone gets to speak. No one person dominates, and no person is excessively taxed. More about the common meals. It has been called the secret sauce. It has been called the highlight of co-housing. It is the essence because breaking bread together has been historically the basis of community. You start up together when the community is forming with meals. My group right now, we're doing virtual happy hours. And it has been said by experienced co-housers that unless you have 2 times a week a common meal together, quote, it's little more than a quality condominium project with those party rooms. Finally, this is not a commune. People mistake that. Everybody has their own incomes. They do not get income from the community, even if the community has commercial spaces. 2 types that the Danes have set up. Multi-generational, the important thing about this is when the community is designed, you build in a lot of kid-friendly things. And co-housers talk about how it's a safe place for children and that you have so many mentors, or what they call the 100 parents. The children's spaces are in the design from the very beginning. The teen spaces probably should be in the design from the very beginning because kids grow up. With seniors, the key thing here is it's senior-friendly design. A lot of senior co-housing are only on one level. They have, of course, the assisted characteristics that are recommended for senior housing. Here's a really important thing. Senior co-housing is an alternative to what we in the United States are expected to transition into, whether it's assisted living or nursing homes. Co-housers in senior communities find that they have healthy living and they're not isolated in a private home where you have to have services come in. They have an active social life, they have purpose and identity, and they save on energy, they save on driving. And again, many of them incorporate the co-care principle that I mentioned. And that is that in their values, people help their neighbors to the best of their ability. And in the design, they incorporate caregiver accommodations and figure out how that's going to be used. This is kind of an obvious slide, but I just wanted to point out that existing successful co-housing communities can be any place within a city or rural. Here are the typical construction types. It's, new from the ground up, but there are examples of where a neighborhood's been transformed, retrofitted over time, where a home in a neighborhood turns out to be the common house, and as homes are sold in the neighborhood, they get added to the co-housing community. There's also examples of repurposing where you take, for example, an apartment building and turn it into co-housing. And finally, numerous examples of where a building that's never been used for housing is reconfigured or adaptive reuse. This is an important decision when a community is starting to talk about building itself, and that is, what kind of model of housing type do you want? And a lot of it has to do with what the financial goals. It also has to do sometimes with the regulations of a locality. But there are lots of examples of private and condo ownership and co-op and even rental buildings. I mentioned again the sustainability. The co-housers believe that they are light on the planet. They build on as little land as they possibly can. They have green practices. They practice energy efficiency, either in the initial design or retrofit. They reduce their auto use, and with the sharing culture, they limit consumption. Now, I have been talking about co-housing since 2018 in education venues, and these are the kind of questions that come up. First of all, privacy. Well, your unit is as private as you want to make it, and you can have as much privacy as you desire compared to the community living. People tell me, well, how can you get together so many people and there isn't going to be conflict and they aren't going to be able to figure out, and there are going to be grumpy people. And anecdotally, it's been shown that people who come into co-housing, especially once a community is established and somebody buys into the co-housing community and they don't buy into co-housing principles, they tend to self-select out. And the other thing is the self-management part, the governance part. They learn from consultants how to handle conflict. They do training, and they do training and have teams on conflict resolution. So they're very aware of these potential problems. Finally, and this has been kind of a thing for me, is that cost historically has been high. However, the co-housing world is looking at that hard. So how do you get diversity of income in a co-housing community? Well, initially it was through design by limiting floor plans, limiting customization. But some groups found that their locality expected them to have below market rate units that could be owned or rented, or they chose to do it on their own. Nonprofits have become involved in some communities where they actually purchase a unit so that they can have a family under affordable guidelines. And here's the growing emphasis, and that is in land trusts and development funds from municipalities for affordable housing. Now, what I want to do is talk briefly and show you briefly two websites that are extremely informative about how co-housing. Of course, first is the Co-Housing Association of the United States, COHO USA. And COHO USA has lots of information about all the things and lots of articles and help and consultants. And they also have a community directory, which I want to show you quickly how you can search it and look up information. I'm going to go to advanced search. And I'm going to select here the category of community. And we're going to look at Minnesota, co-housing in Minnesota. And you can look at other states in case you want to live somewhere else. And you come up with a map and you come up with a list. And notice there are 3 forming groups in Minneapolis alone. I'm going to click on Monterey because Monterey is the oldest community of co-housing in Minnesota and one of the oldest in the United States. They started up in 1992. The directory, the community provides information for the directory, such as a description, shared property, visitors, how they're making decisions, even what the common meal is, that kind of thing, and contact information in case you want more information, and the website for the community. And then I'm having trouble getting my website up because the page is being covered.
No worries. You want to kind of click and drag the top banner and have it be a little bit below the share screen icon. That way it doesn't obscure the view.
Excellent. Thank you very much. I've been learning how to do that. Okay, so the Foundation for Intentional Community is an umbrella organization which includes co-housing. I'm going to click on that also. And you can see that there's information again about co-housing, in particular, an online community directory. You can do an advanced search there. I'm going to do an advanced search. So please forgive me for going so quickly through this. I tend to do this in my community ed classes, and they always tell me, stop, don't go so fast. So I'm just going to click on Minnesota. I'm not going to pick any other option on this huge search form, but you can do a lot of information about what are intentional communities. All right, so you see that there are 20 communities in Minnesota. I'm going to narrow that by going to the established, so we can take a look at established. You'll see that community types include even loaves and fishes for this website and other places. And here's Monterey Co-Housing. And I always give these two websites because I want people to get as much information as possible about a community. Now, Monterey has not updated in 2 years, and so you have to kind of take some of the statistical information as a grain of salt, but there's lots of contact information, and the directory is just full of information that the community has provided in filling out its directory form, whether it's how they make decisions, what their lifestyle is, their economics. Notice here, Monterey expects a 2-hour-a-week contribution. Of course, the contributions depend on your ability to do them. There's information about housing, so you can get such rich information, including even about the building site. Okay, so let me give you the references that I used to create this talk and when I teach classes in community ed. First is Chuck Durrett's Senior Co-Housing Handbook. I've read this and the next one from cover to cover, and I recommend them if you want to learn more. And here is a book that Katie and Chuck wrote a new edition of from their 1980 book that launched the evangelism of co-housing in the United States. Again, I've read this book from cover to cover, and I highly recommend if you just want to look at co-housing and how it works and lots of examples. And finally, I've included this on the slides because my experience with community ed is that people have to kind of take a self-inventory to figure out if they want to live in community, unless they're definitely sure that they do. And this book by Marianne Kilkenny, Your Quest for Home, is full of worksheets to help you with a self-inventory to be able to help you answer that question. So let me use some bullet points here to emphasize what I think people need to think about if they want to live in community and definitely want to live in co-housing. You really need to figure out what unit size you want and whether you need parking. And if you're in the Duluth area, is it a suburb? Is it the region? What are your community values? What are the things that you have to have that your community will agree on? And what can you live without? And this is really important. I mean, as you get to know people, you have to figure out if you can collaborate and cooperate with them, because this is a cooperative culture. And finally, you know, in the United States, we live by the majority vote. Oh, but we don't when it comes to elections. But, and we need to put that aside, and we need to figure out how to make decisions where all voices are heard. All right, these are my answers to those questions. I live in a 1-bedroom, 1-bath apartment. I think I would not mind having a 2nd bedroom, but it wouldn't be essential because I'd use it for storage. I'd really like to live in a community where I don't have to park a car and I'm sharing a car with the community. And with Duluth and Duluth suburbs, I'd like to be near public transportation, or I've even considered 2 harbors. The values I really need, and there are a few more, but here are 3. I want to live in a community that recognizes that they need to incorporate all kinds of income levels. I also want to be in senior co-housing with co-care values and practices and a creation of spaces in the planning. And I'd ideally like to be as green as possible. These are the things I do not want in my community. I really don't want smokers. I really would like to have an idea in the heads of the people who live there that they're not buying an investment, that property is not a commodity. Also, that the community is not gated, that it reaches out to its neighbors, whether it's particularly in an urban setting, but anywhere. And finally, that the community and the members aren't willing to learn and grow. I believe I can cooperate and collaborate with new people. And I'm going to ask those people to tell me when I'm not doing that. And finally, I want and have been doing research into consensus and consent to make decisions. So finally, to wrap this up, I have a local effort. I have created a meetup, and the information is in the chat box about how you can get into the meetup. But all you really need to do is go to meetup.com and search out Cohousing for the Northland. I'm hoping you'll consider joining it. It's a platform for communicating. We're going to have a meeting on Friday at 5:30 on January 8th, and we'd love to have anybody who's interested come and meet us and tell us about your interests.